What's up? Welcome back, everyone. In this episode, we're going to talk about how you can build a tool to pull an API endpoint on some periodic basis. We're building this tool for tracking Form 4 filings that are happening on the SEC and then alerting us when there's some sort of like interesting filing that we might want to take action on. And so what we've done so far is we have backfilled. We are working on backfilling existing filings. And so we've got a tool that can run background jobs to fetch filings. It's using Rescue for our background queuing system. And you'll notice that we have this kind of like Rescue web endpoint that we can check out. And you'll see I just queued our big backfill job. So it's going to go and pull down a bunch of filings for a previous quarter in a previous year. And so we're continuing to sort of like backfill filings that we don't know about yet. In a previous episode, we talked about this backfill filings job. So I wanted to quickly cover what changes I made to that because I think it's like a kind of a fundamental thing to think about when you're building background job systems. And then I wanted to work on our tool for polling for recent filings so that we can see, as soon as filings are being created, that we can see those popping up. So this is still going. What we had before was in our backfill filings job is we would just iterate over all of the filings, and then we would create a new temporary filing, and then we would just persist that to the database. Now this was tricky because, it was tricky because in some cases the index has maybe in this case, like over 30,000 filings. And in the process for persisting the filing to the database, we were going out and fetching each of those. So our background job was really long running. So we're talking like hours, right? So the entire job to persist all the filings for a given index. And again, an index is just like a massive list of links that go of paths that tell you where filings exist. And so in order for us to process an entire index, it would take like hours and hours and hours. If any of those filings failed to persist, or if there was any exceptions that happened while persisting any of those filings, then the entire job would fail and all of the future filings would not be persisted to the database. And so what we want to do is, in the case that you're trying to read in a bunch of data, you want to read in, if you need to do two actions that might require some async work. So the first action being an async task to fetch this big index file, and then the second being n+1 basically, or n queries for each of the items in that index. So we needed to go out as part of persisting this filing, we would go out and make an HTTP request to fetch down the data for each of those filings. And so what we did instead is I refactored this into a second job called persist filing, which is just for an individual filing. And so what happens now is when we run the backfill filings job for a given quarter and in a year, we go through the index. So we download that master index from the SEC, and then we kind of munge the index to find the actual items that we care about, and we create a link, and then we just kick off a bunch of subtasks. If the filing that we're looking at from the index is a Form 4, there's a bunch of other forms we don't care about, 10Ks and S1s and whatever. We're just kind of excluding those. So if it's a Form 4, then we want to schedule another background job for each of those Form 4s. And then in persist filing, what we do is we just call filing persister.persist. And so we create a new temporary instance of an SEC filing, and then we persist it. And this filing persister class will actually fetch the filing. So let's see. So write filing parser. So filing parser.new, we pass in the temporary filing parser. So when we call this content method right here, so .content, so when we initialize the filing parser, this is creating an HTTP request that goes outbound. So when we're going through the process of reading in the data from the SEC, we ingest that text file, which is in sort of an XML format. We parse the XML into a bunch of Ruby structs, and then we take those structs and we write them to the database into these Form 4 objects with related company and insider. So that's kind of where we're at right now with our backfill process. I wanted to just talk through how we had to make that small modification so that it would go one by one. And now you can see, so after I enqueued the task here for backfilling filings, it went up to 56K plus. And as we refresh the page here, you can see the jobs are going down like one by one. And that's because we've scheduled 56,000 new background jobs for each of the individual filings for that given index. And then if we come over to our live Form 4s here and we refresh the page, we'll see that this is like the count of our Form 4s. So we're at like 97,552. Now, technically what I could do is scale up the rescue processes so that I have, 20 workers or something that are all chewing through this and downloading filings. But I've actually decided not to do that intentionally because I don't want to like DDoS or like spam the SEC's website. In fact, they say, please keep your requests to under 10 per second. I'm actually doing less than 10 per second, but I really don't want to abuse the API. I just want to like pull in all the data that I care about for like recent years. And so this is kind of how we set it up. You can see these are the jobs that are running. So the next job that we want to create though is a new job that will just pull for the recent filings. So if I think we have recent, yeah, so we actually have this recent filings job here, and it too is going to farm off to this persist filing job thing. And we kind of like started this out. We started building the fetch recent filings job and then sort of like changed direction and went and did the backfill. And so I came back here and just added in this persist filings job performed later. So this should work, I think, out of the gate. And this takes in some count of recent filings to run. Now the difference is that when we fetch recent filings, if we receive a new filing, we want to probably do something about that potentially. So what I want to do today is look at making like a very, very primitive alert system that will look at the recent filings. And if there was an interesting filing, it will kick off the notification. So in a previous episode, we used Noticed, which is a gem for creating notifications created by Chris Oliver. And so in this episode, what we want to do is build on our notification system and our polling system so that we can run these tasks, or like run this background job on like a every few minutes basis. And if there's a new Form 4 that has some interesting data that will create like some filters for, we want it to notify us about those Form 4s. So what I think makes most sense is to create a rake task. So we've got, in a previous episode, we talked about the process for making these rake tasks. So we actually have sec4.rake here, and we have poll recent filings, and it is passing in the count. So this is actually all looking really good. So we can use this rake task to kick off this fetch recent filings job, and we can pass in the count as an argument. So let's open up Heroku add-ons open scheduler. And this is the tool that allows you to schedule rake tasks inside of Heroku. And it looks like we don't actually have this add-on yet. So let's create the scheduler add-on. So we're gonna say Heroku add-ons create scheduler. And this will add the like Heroku scheduler. And now we can open that up. All right, scheduler is a free add-on for running jobs. So we're gonna create a new job, and we're gonna run it every 10 minutes, and the job is going to be rake SEC4, and it's called poll recent filings, and we're going to pass it a count. So what I think makes most sense is probably 10, or let's do 20. So the most filings I expect to be new in the course of 10 minutes is going to be 20 filings. I don't think that many come in. So let's just say poll recent filings will poll for 20 filings. And this is going to be the hobby, whatever. So this should run every 10 minutes. So we'll save that job. And so now this should run every 10 minutes. The other thing I wanted to do is let's go to this fetch recent filings job and talk about queues. So by default, we usually queue things as default. I actually have a priority. Okay, so when you deploy to Heroku and you're using this rescue schedulers, you define the queues, and oftentimes we'll say, just star, which says like, take tasks or take background jobs off of any queue of any priority and execute those when you pass star like this. And this is what I use in most cases. However, because we have these really long running background jobs that are executing and taking forever, right? Let's see. So if we look at these jobs, right? In the default queue, we have persist filing job and we have that background task job. Because those are really, really long running, those are going to happen. Those are going to take a really long time to actually execute. So I think what we might want to do is, in this case, create the poll. So I think we do want it as default, because we're not always going to be backfilling. Once the backfilling is done, then we should only be doing the polling jobs, which are going to be pretty quick. So let's just keep the priority as is. Poll, backfill, poll, fetch. That's fetch recent filings job. Yeah, so we're going to keep this queued as default. We'll keep this one queued as default, and that'll just run. Okay, so the first time this executes, the first time that this job executes, the poll, the fetch recent filings job is going to be queued behind all of the default, or like behind all of these persist filing jobs that are waiting to be backfilled. So I suspect this is actually going to take longer than 10 minutes. Longer than 10 minutes. So we might actually end up with several fetch recent filings jobs queued, which won't actually execute until after all of the background ones are run. And then we will fetch the recent filings several times and try to persist those filings. So this is not ideal, but I think it's fine for now. Okay, let's make another job which will notify on recent filings. So we'll say Rails G job notify recent filings. Okay. Notify recent filings job. And this job's job will be responsible for iterating over recent filings that we have not checked yet. And if there's anything interesting about them, then we will kick off a notification. So what we want to do here is we want to sort of iterate over form 4. So we're going to do something like form4 dot where checked is false dot each do form. And then we want to say form dot is interesting or something like that. Form dot should notify. And if it should notify, then we're going to kick off our notification. So we'll say form for notification. So we're using the noticed gem for this. So we'll say notification.with form 4 is the form. And then we'll say .deliver later to some user. In this case, I'm just going to say user.first, and that's me. But I think we would probably want, so this is going to be interesting because we need first of all, we need to go add the concept of whether or not the form has been checked. And after the form is checked, we're going to say form.checked or .update checked to true. And we'll drive on and we'll just assume that we've sort of marked it as checked. So we have all these form 4s in the database. We're going to create a new migration that will add this Boolean checked. And when we perform this notify recent filings job, we'll go look at all the forms that we haven't checked yet. which should only be recent filings. Actually, yeah, the other thing we could do is say where the filing date is greater than yesterday, so that we only really want to notify about stuff that's being filed today or being filed recently. So yeah, I wonder if we want to like wait until this is backfilled, until everything is backfilled, or we can update our persistence. Like I'm humming and hawing here because of a couple things. Like I'm just I threw out this code, but I haven't really like fully thought through exactly how this should work. And technically this should notify method doesn't exist, right? So form 4 doesn't have a should notify method. That's where like the real juicy stuff happens. Like we're going to look at all the data about the form 4 and about the insider and their previous trades and the company and its market cap and what its current trading price is and things like that. And if all of those things say that we should notify, then we will notify. But so for instance, like if we were to just start with some really naive should notify, we might say something like should notify, and we can say like, is it a buy? Is the insider the CEO, CFO, or the like president? And is the number of shares changing the total holdings by more than 5%? So this is where the actual like strategy comes in about which forms we think are interesting or think might be interesting. And so I think we might actually want to create some sort of like settings that someone would determine their sort of like threshold for when they want to be notified. And so that's going to get a little bit interesting, right? Because someone might want to be notified only if it's a sale and only if it's a director of marketing or something like that, right? So this is where it's going to get a little dicey. So let's start basic. Let's just start really basic and say, and we'll just use these three sort of markers. So is it a buy? So we can say like if sum shares is greater than 0. So is it a buy? And is the insider's title, do we have the title here? Yeah, so the officer title. Officer title is we'll just say leader, which we'll define as like, is it a CEO, CFO, or president? And so it turns out that when people create these filings, the title that they actually use on the form is like not super consistent. So I think I have like a tool maybe somewhere that does some parsing of the officer title, but let's see Rails C. Let's just take a look at some form 4s. Actually, let's Heroku run Rails C. So we're going to look at the database on Heroku. So we're looking at like more data. Right now, I don't have very many filings locally because I didn't want to like fetch all the data locally and then also on Heroku. So let's see here. So we want to take a look at those officer titles and think about how we're going to determine whether it's a CEO, CFO, or president. And the reason why I'm going with those specific titles is that in the investment intelligence based on insider trading book that we talked about earlier, investment intelligence from insider trading. So this white covered book is super good if you're interested at all in digging into insider trading and such, or like form 4 filings, then I would definitely recommend this book. And in this book, there's a lot of data that shows that these specific insiders or like officers with these specific titles tend to like have more gray area type information and like a better sense for how the business is going to go. So let's see. So form form4 dot pluck officer title. Oops. Form4 dot pluck officer title. Okay, so tons of officer titles. All right, let's. Yeah, it's gonna pull down 50,000 titles or something. Ah, stop. Okay. So form4 dot where. Well, yeah. So dot pluck officer title dot form4 dot order officer title dot pluck officer title dot unique. Okay. Dot length. So there's 6,000 unique titles. So like, right, VP of Worldwide Sales and Marketing, VP of WGO, President Newmar, right? Like these are all VP of Underwriting. So the likelihood that a VP of Underwriting is going to make a decision about the company, like a buy decision about the stock in the company, and that decision being like a really solid signal that the company is going to increase in share value, is less likely than if the title was CEO, right? And so what I think we want to do is pull out the officer title, and let's just take a look here at what these look like. Okay. Yeah, so sometimes, right, like, so sometimes the title is going to just be like CEO, and then other times it's going to say Chief Executive Officer. So Chief Financial Officer, right? Chief Accounting Officer, Senior Vice President. See remarks, that's where it's like really complex about their role, like what they actually do. Principal Accounting Officer, etc., etc. Pres dot, President. Okay, so what I think we want to do is we want to take the officer title and we want to see if it has CEO, CFO, President, Chief stuff, Chief of things. So form4, okay. So let's say the officer title, let's see, how should we do this? Yeah, I think we could probably do like some sort of regular expression here. Let's try this out. So if we say like VP Worldwide Sales is the title, and if we say that's like title, and if we say title tilde equals for regex, and if we say VP star, then maybe I did this the wrong way. Okay, 0 VP det star. Okay, so when you use this style regular expression, it's returning the index of the match, I think. So if we tried like sales, yeah, okay. So let's grab a couple of these titles and go to Rubular. So Rubular is a really handy tool for Ruby regular expressions. So we're going to put a couple of titles in here. So let's do tube and wire. And then like, let's get a none. Yeah, here we go. Treasurer, CFO and CLO. And let's see. Co-CEO, interesting. COB and CEO. Okay, so then we want our regular expression to be something like CFO or CEO, right? And so if it matches CEO or CFO, then we do want it to hit. And so that is like actually hitting. So then I think we want also dot like pres dot. So let's see. What were those? President. Co-president MD. And EVP and president of some specific thing. So EVP and president of like a, I don't know, like that's a little bit less. Like if it has EVP, then maybe they have like a little bit less information. So maybe we just stick with CEO and CFO and then chief. Yeah, so then we also need like chief executive officer. So we need like, yeah, where is it? This is going to be up closer to the top. Yeah, so chief executive officer. And we want it to be case insensitive, so we can say /I. So here we'll say chief executive. Okay, so I think this is what we want, something like this. So plop that in there. And then we'll say, and if this is not nil, then sure, it's a leader. Like this is probably close enough. And we want this to be case insensitive. And again, this is probably something that I would do, write a little test for, but whatever. For now, we can just keep flying by the seat of our pants. So leader. Okay, and so if it's a buy and it's a leader and some shares divided by, or like let's say like percent change here. And this is going to be like the sum shares over shares after. Let's see. Some shares after. Some shares after. And if like percent change is greater than 0.05, then we should notify. So this is gonna, again, like, just taking a look at our methods that we wrote here. So the buy is looking at this same database. The leader is looking at the same database. The percent shares is looking at the database. So technically, I think we could write like a really fancy query that just leveraged Postgres to find these form 4s and give them to us. Because we're going to do this in a notifier, we're going to be looking at individual forms, and so it's fine if we're just using Ruby directly. But let's try messing around with some actual form 4s. So if we say Rails C, form 4.first, and I put it on the wrong side again. I don't know why I think it should go on the other side. And that probably needs a 0, huh? 0.05. Okay, so form 4.first should notify, and it's false. Okay, so f dot sum shares, f dot officer title. So this one failed because it was not positive. So let's say form 4.where sum shares is greater than 0. Dot first, and then we'll say f dot should notify. False. Okay, so f dot sum shares is 951. F dot sum shares after is that. So the percent change is 0 because we didn't use like floating point division. These are just integers. So we can say .fdiv for floating point division, and then we'll reload and grab that same form, and then f.percent change. Okay, so it was a 1% change. That wasn't enough. Let's just like edit this form. This is a local form, so f.sum shares after, I don't know, let's just say that f.sum shares was actually equal to like 30K. And then f.save, bang, f.should notify false. So f dot percent change is, okay, so the percent change is enough. F dot, it's a by. F dot leader, it's not a leader. Okay, so f dot officer title is blank. Great. Okay, so in this case, we don't actually know the title of the officer, and it's possible that this insider in particular is not actually an officer at the company. It's possible that this insider is a 10% beneficial owner of the company. And so if you own more than 10% of a company, when you make trades in that company, you have to file that with the SEC. Just to make this like fun, let's set the officer's title to like Chief Financial Officer, and then say f dot leader, and it's true. So now f dot should notify is true. Okay, so I think that's like a good enough like rough test. And what we can do now is in our notify recent filings job, we're gonna say, right, we need to go back. Okay, so now we've got this should notify thing. Cool. We've got our form 4 notification, and we're just going to deliver it to me, and our should notify is just going to work for my settings for now. We need to go back and add this checked false situation. So Rails G migration add checked to form 4s. Checked is Boolean. And we'll say default. We're going to set the default value for this column to be false. And then we're going to, like in the same migration, we're going to say form4.update, and we're going to set checked to true. So this is a little trick where we want to add a column to the database that by default is set to false, but we want to mark all of the ones that are already in there as true. So instead of setting the default to true and then like figuring out a way to like uncheck that or something for the new ones, we can just set it all to false, which is going to mean that we haven't seen it yet. Then we're going to check all, or like mark all the ones that we have backfilled as true. And we'll run this migration, rake db migrate. And if everything succeeds, then we will, we'll just push this up. So we're going to say like add checked to forms. All right, so fetch, no, we're going to say notify recent filings job. Okay, so now we have this concept of it being checked. We have the concept of it if we should notify or not, and we are going to notify this specific user. Okay, and then we're going to update check to true. Great. So now when I'm backfiling, I'm doing backfiling, so backfiling job. When we're persisting a filing from an old year, from a previous year, maybe we're looking at 2018, maybe we're looking at 2017, I don't want to check or alert on those filings. I only want to have those there as context so that we can improve that should notify method in the future. So what I want to do is I'm going to change this persist filing job to accept another argument, and I'm going to pass in true, and it's a positional argument. We should probably give these keyword arguments or something, but persist filing job, and this is going to be checked. And I think our filing persister is also going to need that, because where the form 4 is actually created, yeah, so where the form 4 is created, if we so at checked is equal to checked. Yeah, so right, and then we're going to just say checked is at checked. So when we're persisting filings, if we received checked true, then we're going to mark it as checked. And if we didn't receive it, then here, we'll just default this to false. Because in our, actually, we'll not default it. We're going to, oh, okay. I'm torn because we have a bunch of jobs that are already running. Whatever, let's just deploy it and we'll break those currently running jobs. That's totally fine. We can keep backfilling them. That's actually like probably a little better. So then everywhere that we're using the filing persister, we need to pass in the filing and whether or not it's checked. So, and persist filing job. So we've got checked coming in there, and we got checked coming in here. And let's see where we've got persist filing job. So we're passing it there, and now we're going to pass it here. And here we're going to pass false, because this is going to be the recent filings, right? And I think that might be the only place that we use this. So filing persister. So just in case we uncomment that later. Okay, so this should work, I think. When we deploy it, it's going to break our current jobs. That's totally fine. So like add concept of checked to filing persistence. Okay, I think it was deployed. Let's refresh this. We're looking again at our jobs here, and I think this failed queue is about to get really popular. Let's see. Or like highly populated. So heroku logs -t. And oh, here we go. 3, 30, 41, 52, 63, 69. Okay. So like all of the jobs that are in the default queue that are no longer passing the correct arguments to persist filing job because they don't pass that checked flag are now starting to fail. We also want to run heroku run rake db migrate so that our form data that's on Heroku picks up that new checked flag. And I have a feeling that our thing is going to just crash, like the whole process is going to crash. So what I think, let's see. Yeah, so let's see if we can just remove the entire queue. This cannot be undone. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. All right. Failed jobs, clear all the failed jobs. Yes. Okay, going back to our overview. You probably don't want to do that in real life, right? Like if you're not 100% confident that you'll be able to like pretty quickly and easily re-establish all those jobs. The way that I've written is like idempotent, so it's totally fine if I rerun all the same jobs over and over and over, which is why I'm comfortable just running it like that. The other thing too, well, so one of the changes that I made was that when I was looking at a company, I have a button here. So APP, right, is the company that we're about to open. After this migration runs. Okay, so now we should be able to say heroku run rake db migrate, and it should just add the column to the database with its default, and it should return like immediately, no memory errors. It's just like a simple, super simple task. We shall see. And done. Great. Now we can come over here and try running this. Actually, hold on. Reload. Maybe 1,000 was too much. Let's try like, I don't know, 1. Okay. 10. 100. Wow, that takes surprisingly long. That's frustrating, but it'll work. Okay, so we are now at a point where we have background jobs that are being scheduled for recent filings. These failed, I'm guessing, because we don't have checked. Yeah, so there was no check. So if we say retry for all of these, retry failed jobs, they should all run fine. So now we can clear the failed jobs. and then we'll come back over here, and all of them should have run just fine. So now we should see like these new filings come in, and we did, and this is for a couple days ago, so not super, it wasn't, yeah, it was a couple days ago, but yeah, let's take a look. And then refresh the prices. So we have to, the reason that I added a button to refetch prices is that I don't want to hammer the AlphaVantage price API too much. And instead I only really want to fetch the prices when I care about looking at them on a chart. And so, yeah, this was a sell anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But okay, so I think things are working okay. We've got our poll going with Heroku Scheduler. And we should be notifying on recent filings. So we don't have time to like sit around and wait for a filing to come in, although that would be fun. So I'm just gonna let it rock, and hopefully I get an email, and yeah, I will report back in a future episode. So thanks a ton for watching, and yeah, we'll see you next time.